Welcome back to Tousi TV. I'm Emily Schrader from here in Tel Aviv, bringing you the latest developments from Israel this week, just ahead of the Passover holiday. But just because it's a holiday doesn't mean that it's quiet here in Israel. So let's dig into a little bit of what went on this week. First, we have the war front update with the IDF eliminating several key terrorists this week in multiple locations. The IDF has been very busy this week launching a focused ground offensive in the Shujaya neighborhood of Gaza City, also issuing evacuation notices for northern Gaza. Now, on April 9th, a targeted airstrike actually eliminated Haitham Sheikh Khalil. Now, this guy was the commander of Hamas's Shujaya battalion. Of course, he played a central role in the October 7th attacks, particularly on Nahal Oz, one of those southern communities, where, in fact, from that community alone, 75 Israelis were murdered just from one of, and these are small towns. These are not major cities we're talking about. In a separate strike, of course, we saw Israel eliminate Mohammed Hassan Mohammed Awad. He was a senior terrorist from the Palestinian Mujahideen group. Now, Awad was linked to the kidnapping and murder of the very high-profile now murders of Shiri Bibas and her two infant sons, Kfir and Ariel, as well as the American and Canadian hostages, Judy and Gadi Weinstein-Hagai. Now, we saw Israeli security forces confirm this week that they've killed 11 terrorists who were directly involved in the October 7th massacre since the resumption of the war after the most recent ceasefire agreement expired. But the attacks did not end just in Gaza. We also saw the IDF taking action in Lebanon and Syria this week, far beyond the borders of Gaza. On April 7th, we saw that there was an airstrike in Lebanon which killed a senior Hezbollah field commander in Tyre who was planning on carrying out cross-border rocket attacks against Israeli civilians. Now, we actually did see some of these attacks this week. I'll detail them a bit more in a few seconds, but just for now, I want to emphasize that on April 8th, Israel also struck a weapons depot and command post that was used by Islamic regime-backed militias in southern Syria. So this is still happening, and that took place after 6 rockets were fired from Syria towards the Golan Heights. Now, no casualties were reported in these strikes, but several launch sites were destroyed. When it comes to the rocket attacks in Israel, we're really facing, at least this week, a 3-front challenge. It could be worse, it could be more, but 3 is pretty bad. Now, since Sunday, Israel has been targeted from Gaza with at least 14 rockets that have been fired. Most of these were intercepted by the Iron Dome, but one of them did actually get through and hit Ashkelon in southern Israel on April 6th, which did injure 1 civilian. Then from Lebanon, we saw that 16 rockets were launched on April 5th. Several of them struck near Kiryat Shmona, prompting evacuations. And then from Syria, we saw 6 rockets being fired towards northern Israel on April 8th and 9th. Now, all were either intercepted or landed in open areas, as we see that the Iron Dome continues to do the heavy lifting. But the message, of course, is clear, and that is that Israel is still under attack from not 1, not 2, but at least 3 directions this week alone. And we're not even getting to the Houthis yet. In regards to the hostage situation, we do see that negotiations are still underway. Currently, we have 59 Israeli hostages who remain in Hamas custody in Gaza. And of course, there was a sobering update this week confirming what we already had evidence of before. Donald Trump revealed he believes only 24 of those 59 are confirmed to be alive. U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, of course, is working with Egyptian and Qatari mediators to finalize some kind of deal for their release. Trump did say that a ceasefire package is close, in his words, but as of yet has refused to provide timelines or details of what we're really talking about here in terms of these negotiations. It's obviously a very heartbreaking situation on the ground here in Israel, as we have many families who'll be setting empty seats at the Passover Seder table this year for those 59 hostages. Then moving to Washington, we have Netanyahu's visit. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu traveled to Washington earlier this week for talks with President Trump. Of course, he's talking about what everyone is talking about this week, the tariffs, as well as the hostage deal. And that was the official focus of it, the 17% tariff that Trump's tariffs slapped on Israeli exports. But the real bombshell wasn't actually the discussion about tariffs, which didn't seem to go anywhere with Netanyahu's visit. It was actually that Trump announced during that visit that the U.S. would begin what he called direct negotiations with the Islamic regime in Iran over their nuclear program. This is, of course, a claim that the regime immediately denied. Classic Islamic Republic, always playing these ego games. We're not doing direct talks, we're doing indirect talks. But allegedly, there will be talks taking place this weekend through Oman, led by Steve Witkoff. It remains to be seen what will come of that. But we did have President Trump issuing a pretty stern warning. Take a look.
Mr. President, Iran, you said the other day that if they do not agree to a potential nuclear deal, that it would be very dangerous for them. What specifically?
Well, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
Did you mean military action, though, if they don't agree?
Oh, if necessary? Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you have a deadline for these talks?
Yeah, I do.
And
You're talking about with Iran?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want something definitive this weekend, or do you see this as the start of a process?
It's a start.
Do you have a timeline?
We have a little time, but we don't have much time.
Who is starting the
because we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
Now to France. I know it's not the Middle East, but I've got to throw it in there. We saw in Europe French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that France may recognize a Palestinian state in June at the United Nations conference. France always throwing out helpful policy for the Middle East, you know. Israel's foreign minister, of course, blasted this move as a reward for massacres and rape, while Macron insisted that it's a step towards peace. Well, as an Israeli, I can assure you, Macron, there's nothing peaceful about rewarding terrorists with a state. Rewarding Hamas has worked so well until now, as you all can see. So perhaps maybe it's time to consider a new policy. I digress. Next story, veterans on demand. We have nearly 1,000 Israeli military veterans, reservists, including some former generals and pilots who published an open letter this week actually calling on the Israeli government to end the war in Gaza and prioritize the release of hostages. Now, it's not because they're against the war itself, but rather because they feel it would be more effective to pause the war and bring back the hostages, calling it even a moral failure to continue the operation while the hostages' lives hang in the balance. Now, Netanyahu responded to this by dismissing the signatories as extremists, and the IDF actually did bar many of them, if not all of them so far, from serving reserve duty in response. So a major development there on that front. Protests are still continuing this week over all the controversy. We saw the Israeli Supreme Court temporarily block Prime Minister Netanyahu's attempt to dismiss the Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar. Now, the court issued an interim order on April 9th stating that Ronen Bar must remain in office until at least April 20th, while urging both sides to reach a compromise to avoid a potential constitutional crisis. And I love that they're calling it that because, of course, Israel does not have a constitution. Now, Netanyahu's move to oust Bar stems from alleged failures to prevent the October 7th Hamas attack. However, critics are arguing that the dismissal is more politically motivated, linked to Barr's investigation into the Qatargate scandal, which involved some of Netanyahu's aides allegedly working with or for receiving funds from Qatar. That's an ongoing scandal, which I'll update you more about later. But in the meantime, the court's decision has sparked debate over the balance of powers between Israel's executive and judiciary. Now, while some view the court's intervention as absolutely necessary to uphold the rule of law, others, of course, see this as a massive overreach into the executive authority. So this legal battle occurs amidst a broader tension over the judicial reforms in Israel. And more recently, the Knesset actually did pass a law increasing the political control over judge appointments. And this did spark some of the mass protests and concerns about democratic erosion that we've seen in the past week or two that are continuing until now. So as this April 20th deadline approaches, all eyes are really on whether or not a compromise will be reached between Ronen Bar and the current Israeli government led by Netanyahu. And now moving to Turkey. Turkey-Israel talks, trying to avoid further conflict in Syria. So this is a pretty notable development. We have Turkish and Israeli officials initiating technical talks aimed at preventing unintended military clashes in Syria, where both nations have active forces. Now, the first round of discussions took place on April 9th in Azerbaijan, who's sort of acting as a mediator, and they focused on establishing a de-escalation mechanism to avoid misunderstandings over military operations in the region. Now, this comes, of course, as the IDF struck sites that Turkey was trying to create military outposts in Syria, something the IDF will not allow. And now we have the Passover preparations. With Passover just days away, Israelis are preparing to celebrate this holiday in a very different reality. Of course, we have thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers who will be celebrating on the front lines. We have entire communities in southern Israel as well as northern Israel that remain entirely evacuated, in some cases destroyed. And then across the country, we see that families are planning seders with empty chairs for those still held hostage, or in some cases, simply empty chairs for their loved ones who are serving in reserve duty, some cases for many months. But even in these difficult times, of course, the spirit of the Passover holiday remains for the people of Israel: freedom, resilience, and of course, faith in deliverance. So that's it for this week. I want to thank you for joining us on Tousi TV. I'm Emily Schrader, giving you updates from here in Israel, wishing your family a safe and meaningful Passover if you celebrate. And if you don't, go to your Jewish friends and celebrate with them.